Good morning, everybody. Want to welcome you to the Heartland Institute on this gorgeous Saturday morning. And welcome everybody that's watching online. I want to tell you a little bit about the Heartland Institute. I know most of you've been here before, but I just want to tell you a little bit about us. Heartland Institute is a 33-year-old national think tank. One thing we do different than most other think tanks, though, is we work at the state level, trying to work with state legislators to pass free market policies at the state level. Over here on the left, there's a table full of our literature. That's only a sampling of what we have. But you'll also notice 3 newspapers: Environment and Climate News, Budget and Tax News, and School Reform News. Those 3 newspapers go out to every state elected official in the country once a month. So they're all getting our newspapers, trying to talk about free market policies and stuff. You're welcome to pick up copies. You can actually sign up for a 4-month free subscription if you want. Everything on that table is free. There's plenty of literature there. Pick it up. Take it to your friends and family. If you're ever needing speakers, give me a holler. We can talk about that and get you a speaker for your different groups. I know Madeline's here. We was just down at her place for a big group here just recently. So we're always there waiting for you. 2 other centers that we have is Constitution Reform and Healthcare News, but we don't do a newspaper for those currently right now. We're talking about redoing papers for one of those, but right now that's kind of what we do. Today we're here to talk more about education. I'm the project manager for Center for Transforming Education, and to me, if we don't fix education, none of the other issues are going to matter because we're never fixing anything else. There's so many kids going to be indoctrinated that we'll never fix anything. Quick other couple of items here on the left. The bookshelf over there, every book on that bookshelf is $1. If you would like a book, they're $1. So feel free to pick up a book and pay us $1. You can take them with you. We have t-shirts over here for $10. Through this window over here, you'll see actually as our library, the Michael Perry Mazur Library. It actually runs from there all the way back around behind me. We have, I think it's about 18,000 volumes in here now. So if you're ever looking to donate books that you don't need anymore or you think they would be really good for free market policy, we always accept more books. Carl has given us a lot of books already. I've donated books. We have a lot of people donating books, as you can tell. And the library is open during the day. So if you want to come by here like basically 9 to 5, if we're here, you can come in and sit in our library and read books. We have books on virtually every single topic you want to read. If it's policy related, we've got a book on it. So even from opposing views, we have lots of books in here from different points of view, so you can see what other people are saying, what we're saying, and kind of make up your own mind on everything that's going on. So on your table, I'd like to remind you here, those packages there, that is a yellow scarf from National School Choice Week. We have National School Choice Week the end of January every single year. And that's why this year we decided to do, working with AFP, to do an education freedom tour to try to talk more about educational choice, what it really means and what education freedom can mean. And so I brought the scarves out. We'll start passing them out. We'll actually have a tour. If you know people down in O'Fallon, we're going to be in O'Fallon on November 4th. We'll be in Quad Cities on December 7th. We don't have the date set for Bloomington yet in early January, and will culminate in a National School Choice Week event on the south side of Chicago on Saturday, January 27th. So that's kind of where we're heading. I'd like to thank AFP for bringing us the donuts this morning. So you can thank Andrew Nelms, who I'll go ahead and bring up to the stage here. Andrew Nelms is the State Director for Americans for Prosperity. We do have one other guest coming. He is on his way at the moment. He's not here yet. He will join us as soon as he arrives. And I will let Andrew take it away here and introduce you to Americans for Prosperity.
Thank you very much, Lenny. And thank you also for hosting us this morning. I have to say it's always very wonderful to work with Heartland on our side of the issues as a conservative free market organization. It can be very lonely at times, and it's wonderful to have such good friends here at the Heartland Institute doing such good work on such a vast array of issues. We at Americans for Prosperity focus exclusively on promoting free market economic policy. And of course, here at the Heartland Institute, they have a much broader spectrum of areas of expertise than we do. And so it's wonderful to be able to rely on them for their leadership on these issues and for their knowledge on these issues, because that's certainly not my area of focus. But as an organization that exists exclusively to promote free market economic policy, our home office is in Arlington, Virginia, and they handle federal issues. And so right now, as you can imagine, we're spending quite a bit of time educating folks on the tax reform efforts that are underway in Congress. Just night before last, I had a conversation with Congressman Mike Bost in our O'Fallon field office with a few dozen of our friends down there. Just a few weeks ago, here on this very stage, we had a panel discussion with the now president of this august institution, Dr. Tim Huelskamp, and Joe Walsh, who many of you know as a friend and radio host. Both of those men are former members of Congress, and were very good friends of ours when they served in Washington to discuss the tax reform that's underway. And then we have chapters in some 36 states, obviously including Illinois. And you can imagine the types of reactions that I get when I tell people that my job is to promote free market economic policy in Illinois. If I'm talking to somebody from the South, that's when they would say, "Bless your heart." But I always tell people that I'm both a conservative in Illinois and a Cubs fan. Obviously, I'm an eternal optimist. I've been using that joke for years. Last year, I was vindicated on that, on one half of that statement. And then, of course, after the other day, we'll go back to hoping for next year. But as a state chapter, we focus on issues in Springfield and even at the local level. And for years, our chapter's chief priority has been property taxes, first freezing them and then eventually providing true property tax relief. And we go about that in a number of different ways. Obviously, we've been one of the most vocal proponents of a permanent across-the-board property tax freeze. And then at the local level, we've involved ourselves in hundreds of battles across the state to fight property tax hike referenda. On your ballots every year, you'll often see a question that seeks to either implement a new tax, raise an existing tax, or issue debt in the form of bonds. And we've been successful in fighting back many of those across the state. And I'll talk more about that in a minute. But then we also educate folks about how they can monitor their local government and hold their local government accountable through our citizen watchdog training. I think some of you might have attended that in the past. We've worked with a couple of gentlemen from Edgar County, Illinois, known as the Edgar County Watchdogs. You may have heard of them. Edgar County lies 180 miles due south of Chicago along the Indiana border and is home to some 19,000 souls. But these two men who were never involved in politics before both of them got snookered by government and met each other by coincidence at a dinner party and realized that they shared a common frustration towards local government and decided to do something about it. And now over the course of the last 4 years or so, these two men, through their efforts, through their volunteer efforts, have caused the resignation or removal of over 250 elected officials and bureaucrats across the state of Illinois. They were very involved in the College of DuPage business with Dr. Bruder. They were very involved in the Lincoln Way issues at the school district there down in Will County that have led to the recent indictment of the former superintendent there, Dr. Lawrence Wiley, for misuse of funds and fudging the books. But we've had over 450 people go through that class around the state who are now able to better monitor their local government and know what to look for and know what questions to ask. Because oftentimes the folks that run for park boards and school boards and library boards are folks that really like parks and schools and libraries, and so they don't understand why the rest of us don't want to build that new facility, or don't think that the park district should acquire a second or a third golf course, or why we don't want the frolf course or the natatorium or the dog park, the multi-million-dollar dog park, or whatever the case may be. And so it's just another way that we tackle the property tax problem. And so I think that's a little brief introduction to who we are and what we do, and I'm very thrilled that you've joined us here today, and I'm very thrilled for those that are watching from the comfort of their home, likely sitting in their pajamas enjoying their morning cup of coffee. But I'll turn it back over to Lenny for now.
Okay, a couple of quick other things I forgot to tell you. On your table, there is a little notepad there for the Michael Perry Mazur Library. We're going to handle Q&A a little differently today, kind of like we did on the tax form. If you have a question, please write it down at the bottom of that page, or flip it over if you need more room, and then hold your hand up, and somebody will pick those questions up and bring them to us after we're finished speaking and stuff. So I want to make sure everybody's kind of aware of that. If you're online, put your comment in the comments if you have a question in the comments, and we'll make sure those get up to us as well. So we'll have some extra questions that way. Our last guest still isn't quite here yet, so what we can start doing first thing here is go ahead and start talking about property taxes. How are Illinois property taxes? I know most of you know individually how your property taxes are, but Andrew can tell us more about what's happening around the state and what's going on right now.
Everyone's favorite topic, property taxes. It comes as no surprise to anybody in this room or anybody watching online that Illinois taxpayers suffer under the highest property taxes in the nation. In fact, as a percentage of home value, Illinoisans pay double the national average in property taxes. And most homeowners pay more in property taxes than they pay in state income tax. And of course, our highest in the nation property taxes are levied exclusively by our most in the nation units of local government. Now, we know that property taxes are high and that it's a problem, but how high are they? And this isn't the old vaudeville joke, but according to the latest data available from the Illinois Department of Revenue, some 6,038 local governments collected $28.7 billion in property taxes in 2015, which is a 54%, that figure is 54% more than the state income tax brought in that year. Again, meaning that folks pay substantially more in property taxes than they pay in state income tax. And that figure is a year-over-year increase of more than $1 billion, which was 5 times the rate of inflation. Over the previous decade, after adjusting for inflation, property tax collections rose by double digits, by 12%. But during that same time, home values were down 20%, 21% as a matter of fact. And so to me, it hardly sounds like our most in the nation units of local government truly understand the plight of beleaguered Illinois homeowners. And I very much believe that there is a strong correlation between those most in the nation units of local government and our highest in the nation property taxes. Now, as I mentioned earlier, we at Americans for Prosperity believe that a permanent, across-the-board property tax freeze is a necessary but not sufficient first step to providing true and meaningful property tax relief to homeowners across the state. Now, the statewide average of property tax figures that go to schools is 60%. Statewide, 60% of property taxes fund schools. But here in the suburbs, we're coming to you live from Arlington Heights, Illinois. Here in the suburbs, that figure can be 75%. 75% of your property taxes go to fund K through 12 education. And that's in addition to the state resources. Now, I imagine Lenny or Representative Skillicorn may talk about the levels of state funding and where we ought to be and where we are with that. But suffice to say, when you combine state and local spending on K through 12 education, Illinois ranks very near the top of total dollars spent per pupil on public education. And over the past few years, in our effort to realize a property tax freeze, 2 permanent property tax freeze bills have actually passed the Illinois House of Representatives during the last General Assembly, the 99th General Assembly. In April of 2015, a bill sponsored by a Democrat, Representative Jack Franks, who's now the chairman of the McHenry County Board, which applied to all non-home rule units of government, which include schools, passed with 71 votes. And in fact, in the last substantive vote taken by the 99th General Assembly House of Representatives, a measure sponsored by a Republican, Representative Mark Batnick, down from the Will County area, passed with 76 votes. And Governor Rauner has frequently endorsed the idea of a permanent property tax freeze. In fact, he included the notion of it in his budget address earlier this year. Now, a few months ago, the Speaker of the Illinois House of Representatives, a fellow that you may have heard of, a gentleman by the name of Mike Madigan from the south side of Chicago, referred to a property tax freeze as part of an extreme right-wing agenda. Now, I don't agree with. I respectfully disagree with the Speaker on that point. In fact, I would go so far as to say that it's something that Illinoisans expect and demand. Results from polling we conducted earlier this year in 10 diverse state Senate districts confirmed that a strong majority of residents in all areas of the state support a long-term property tax freeze, no matter their party alignment. And one of the handouts that are on your tables is the breakdown of those poll results by state Senate district. And you'll see that in the Senate district of the President of the Illinois Senate, John Cullerton, in his district in Chicago, which is hardly a bastion of conservatism, over 60% of folks that we polled supported a long-term property tax freeze. And while there is strong support for a long-term freeze, support was very low for a short-term fix. Last year, voters in 8 communities around the state weighed in on a non-binding advisory referendum on the issue of a property tax freeze. And in suburban Will County's Homer Township, it passed with an overwhelming 87% of the vote. And down in the Metro East area by St. Louis, in Madison County, in the city of Troy, it passed with 93% of the vote. Nearly 100% of people agreed with the notion of a permanent property tax freeze. And so that's the evidence I would submit to you in response to Speaker Madigan's suggestion that a property tax freeze is part of an extreme right-wing agenda. In fact, again, that question appeared on the ballot in 8 communities, and nowhere did it receive less than 85% of the vote. Now, faced with the inaction on this issue, Illinois families are voting with their feet and leaving. In 2016, and again this year, the nation's largest moving company, United Van Lines, listed Illinois as the state with the second highest outbound migration, second only to New Jersey, which actually displaced Illinois as the state with the highest outbound migration in the United Van Lines study in 2011, in part due to Hurricane Sandy, and in part due to the fact that New Jersey is another state known for crippling pension debt and crippling property taxes. Their analysis also noted that Illinois has ranked in the top 5 for the last 8 years. And they tell us that more than 60% of those people leaving Illinois have an income of greater than $100,000. And an article in Crane Chicago Business Magazine last year noted that Illinois is forfeiting more people than any other state, according to Census Bureau estimates. And earlier this year, the Chicago Tribune reiterated that point by noting that for the 3rd consecutive year, Illinois has lost more residents than any other state, and it's no wonder why. The fact that we have the highest property taxes in the country, the highest unfunded public pension liability in the country, the lowest credit rating of any state in the country. I always joke that Illinois is at the top of every list it ought to be at the bottom of, and we're at the bottom of every list it ought to be at top. No matter where I go in the state, people are planning their exit strategy. In fact, I'm sure many of you are. They're waiting for the kids to graduate. They're waiting to retire. They're waiting for the house to sell, and the house won't sell because of the property tax bill. I talked to a successful businessman once, and he told me that his accountants were working on what he had dubbed Operation Out of Illinois. And at first I thought he was joking, but a few weeks after the conversation, I read in the newspaper that that company was announcing their move to Boca Raton, Florida, and taking hundreds of jobs with it. And frankly, this is also frustrating to me because it shouldn't be this way. By all rights, Illinois ought to be one of the most prosperous states in the Union, save but for bad public policy. We remain the 5th most populous state in the nation, with the country's 3rd largest city, world-class institutions of higher education. Over 30 Fortune 500 companies are headquartered here in Illinois. We've been blessed with abundant natural resources in the form of oil, coal, and natural gas. In fact, 25% of the nation's coal reserves lie beneath Illinois. Our industrious farmers feed the world. We lead the nation in the production of corn, soybeans, and hogs. In fact, 75% of Illinois is covered by farmland. We're a transportation hub. We're amongst the top states in both truck and rail volume. In fact, we have the 2nd largest rail network in the nation with roughly 10,000 miles of track. And if Illinois were a standalone country, our economy would be amongst the top 20 on the globe. Illinois' total gross state product in 2015 was $775 billion, more than $750 billion. Yet, despite all of this, we're the laughingstock of the United States. For heaven's sake, we as Illinoisans consider it a victory that we're back down to one former governor in federal prison. For us, that's a huge step forward. Now, many of these problems are the result of tax issues. Obviously, they just increased the state income tax by 32%. The legislature in Springfield has done nothing to address these crippling property taxes, which in many cases are being levied by school boards. And not only in the annual increases in their levies, but then also through bond issuances. And these questions, large increases in the extension levy and bond issuances, in most cases, need to be put before voters. And one of the other handouts that I have on your table is a quiz. There are 10 examples of actual tax-related referenda that have appeared on ballots around the state in the last few years, many of those placed on the ballot by school boards. And at your leisure, after this or when you get home, I encourage you to take the quiz and see how you do. The pass rate of that quiz is very low. And in an effort to combat increasing property taxes, in 2012, we at AFP Illinois created what we call our local anti-tax initiative. And since then, nearly 1,000 tax-related referenda that seek to implement a new tax, raise an existing tax, or issue municipal debt have appeared on ballots around the state in all but 2 of Illinois' 102 counties. Over the years, our efforts have focused on several hundred of those, including new or increased sales taxes, more than $1 billion in bond issuances, and in addition to grassroots efforts where our volunteers and activists will knock on doors and make telephone calls, those efforts have also included mail and telephone calls. And one of the wonderful things about the program that I've enjoyed the most over the years is that we're able to give voice to the frustration of folks in communities around the state, oftentimes who are fighting these battles alone. We had a woman in Saline County, down in southern Illinois, who almost single-handedly fought several referenda that had been put on the ballot by her local school district, much to the consternation of the folks that were behind these tax questions. In fact, she came home one day and somebody had put a for sale sign in her yard as a friendly suggestion that she look elsewhere. In DuPage County several years ago, some citizens went to the school board and during public comment were voicing their frustration at the perennial tax hikes that the school board was giving to homeowners. And one of the school board members during the public meeting from behind the dais suggested to the public that if they didn't like the taxes that they could move. Oftentimes that's the mindset of the folks that are demanding that you forfeit more of your hard-earned money. In fact, in this spring's consolidated election, voters across Illinois were faced with more than 125 tax-related referenda. And as you may know, turnout is very low during the off-year consolidated elections. And somebody more jaded than I might think that that was on purpose. Different elections, of course, have different turnouts. Using Cook County as an example, Cook County saw turnout of 71% in the 2012 general election, 50% in the 2014 general election, and 71% in the 2012 general election, 50% in the 2014 general election, and turnout in the 2015 consolidated election in Cook County was 14%. So the range of 71% to 14%. And public bodies, taxing bodies, have their pick of which election they put questions to the voters in. In 2016, last year, the Daily Herald, an article in the Daily Herald, the Suburban Daily Herald, noted that in Geneva, the Kane County seat, aldermen speculated that waiting until April 2017 could be beneficial to a sales tax hike referendum because there may be fewer voters at the polls than in November. So this is part of the decision-making process that goes into account when public bodies and elected officials and bureaucrats are deciding when to ask voters for the authority to increase taxes or issue a new tax. They wait until they think they're going to have the smallest turnout. Now, this referendum system, in my mind, lacks transparency, and voters often face opaque and very convoluted questions. Having now spent several years tracking these questions, it's clear to me that improvements need to be made in order to give taxpayers a fighting chance. And that's really what the quiz is supposed to illustrate. And so I can go into some more of those details maybe later during the Q&A, but there's just there are massive financial ramifications to these questions, and they can actually clock in at 300 words or more. 300 words, by the way, is the maximum length of a letter to the editor for the Daily Herald. And these questions can be that long or longer. And just to give you an example, in November 2016, a downstate school district asked voters to approve an $80.6 million bond referendum to build a new high school. And generally, in many cases, the folks that are behind these referenda, that are promoting the passage of these referenda, will couch the cost of it in very minimalistic terms. It's a cup of coffee a day, it's $1 a week, all these things. So what we try to do is paint a realistic picture of the total cost, because we feel that that's really the other side of the question. Because if you just see a question asking, should we approve $80.6 million in bonds? Well, that's like buying a car with only knowing the sticker price. I don't know what my interest rate is, and I don't know what the length of the loan is. I only know the sticker price, and I don't know how many of you would take that deal and buy that car only knowing the sticker price and without knowing the interest rate and without knowing the length of the loan. So as an example, that $80.6 million bond issuance that downstate school district asked voters to approve last November would have translated into as much as $9,150 in additional property taxes to the average homeowner over the 20-year life of the bonds. And that was in a community where the median household income is $45,000 a year. I mean, this is real money we're talking about. And this is in addition to what you're already paying towards your state taxes, towards your local schools in real estate taxes, and what you're paying to local schools through the state income tax. So it's an area of concern for us. It should certainly be an area of concern for you. But generally, again, property taxes are primarily going to fund our schools. And so I think it's especially important to understand the real picture of what's going on with property taxes as we begin to talk about education choice and education reform and the efforts that are underway in Illinois towards those two things. So hopefully I don't have anybody too frustrated. Hopefully nobody's blood pressure has gone up too high. And you know, again, I mean, I'm an optimist. I would not be involved in this. I mean, I wasn't built for cold weather. I would not continue to live here if I didn't think that, you know, there was a way out for some of these problems. And I know that with your hard work and the hard work of wonderful folks like Lenny and the Heartland Institute and Representative Skillicorn, we can find ways to resolve these problems. But with that, I'll either take any questions that you have about property taxes or hand it back over to Lenny.
Yeah, there's a couple of questions here on property taxes. Is there a link between higher property tax and lower population? So as the population decreases, how does that affect the property taxes?
Well, again, I would suggest that there's a strong correlation between our highest in the nation property taxes and our highest in the nation outbound migration. Chicago Public Schools just announced that there are 10,000 less students enrolled in CPS this year than last year. And one of the main contributing factors to there being 10,000 fewer students in CPS this year than last year is, of course, because 10,000 students left CPS. Now, I'd like to think that 10,000 students left CPS to go to a private school or a charter school or a parochial school, or they're being homeschooled now. But that's not the case. Families are fleeing the city of Chicago. Families are fleeing Cook County. Families are fleeing the state of Illinois. And property taxes is certainly a contributing factor to that. Taxes generally is, and so is the job climate. You know, we had a bulletin come out from the Illinois Department of Education, of Employment the other day. Our state employment is hovering around 5%, substantially less than half of what it was a few years ago, which is wonderful. But we're still above the national average, and historically we are above. We've long been above the national average in our unemployment, and you know, it's another topic for another day, I know. But I think a large contributing factor to our unemployment is just the hostility that Illinois has as a state towards business, towards manufacturing in particular. Just the other day, I think Thursday maybe, Toyota announced that they were not going to place a 4,000 job plant. One of the main runners-up was a small town called Rochelle, which is at the intersection of Interstate 39 and U.S. Highway 38. Out in near Lee County, 4,000 jobs. And one of the two reasons that was cited was Illinois' lack of right-to-work laws. Illinois is actually an island in a sea of right-to-work states. Every single one of our neighboring states is a right-to-work state. There's now legislation that's attempting to preempt the authority, the ability of municipalities to enact local right-to-work zones. And so there's a general hostility on the part of the state towards business, which is certainly a contributing factor to our loss of population. But taxes generally and property taxes specifically have a large impact on that. And we welcome to the stage our good friend Representative Alan Skillicorn.
Yeah, Alan's one of the good guys down in Springfield fighting for us.
Thank you for having me this morning.
Well, I got a couple of quick questions for Andrew here, and then we'll give Alan a turn to talk here. With all the people moving out, there's a lot of foreclosures and stuff in Illinois. Can you explain who's actually paying the property taxes at that point and stuff for all those empty and foreclosed houses?
Oh, jeez. Yeah, you see them everywhere, and hopefully some of you have taken advantage of that. I mean, and purchased a foreclosed home or purchased a home on short sale. But I believe in most cases, whoever repossessed the home is continuing to pay the property taxes. So either the bank is paying it or they're going into arrears. And then, that gets messy when somebody goes to buy the home. But the fact is, it's probably been on the market for longer than it would normally be because of the property tax bill. I know we've got some folks here that are in real estate, and they can certainly vouch for that. But some desirable homes in desirable areas are sitting on the market for substantially longer than they would otherwise because of the property tax bill. And then, of course, that's the residential side. The commercial side, I mean, I'm sure that you notice it. You notice it when you drove here. You'll certainly notice it now when you drive home because we've talked about it. But just look at all of the vacant commercial property in the area. And again, that doesn't matter where you are in the state. And that speaks to a general lack of folks to fill those, which speaks to a lack of entrepreneurial activity. And a lot of folks are afraid to take that risk, to go and start something that they wouldn't normally otherwise, because of their fear that it's not going to go well due to the fact that they're in Illinois. They're going to go somewhere else and start that company, or they're just not going to. And so, there's the commercial side to things, which I think is much more visible just because of the volume of commercial space available. But the residential side, and oftentimes, those bills are going unpaid, and that causes problems when down the road.
Yeah,
if
and
you
each
don't,
of the
if you don't mind, I'd love to jump in on that.
Okay.
And there's two sides of that coin, because look at how much that distorts the market. You have the residential side. So if you're an individual that, let's say your family's growing and you want to, get a bigger home or something, if the market is that depressed, if property taxes are eating up that much of the mortgage dollars, how does that affect the marketplace for you trying to sell your home?
Right.
It's going to lower your value. So, and in many cases, you still have people that are upside down, at least upside down, maybe not in the equity, maybe they've been faithfully paying off their mortgage or paying extra towards their mortgage, but now they have a situation where this home is still worth less than they paid for it 10, 15 years ago, so it's not a very good investment. And then you have other people saying, this is not working out for us, walking away from homes. It just distorts that market, pushes down prices even more because there's so much more supply than demand. But on the commercial side, it's even worse. And here's why. Because your commercial property taxes, at least to some degree, are based on how much money the property makes. So if you have a vacant storefront that's now run down, you're going to be able to appeal your assessment, get a lower assessment, and pay a lower property tax. That doesn't lower the total levies. So that means residential property taxes go up because of that. So that vacant building is twofold, because it distorts the market by lowering prices, but it also collects lower property taxes. So that's more money you're paying towards the local municipalities.
Well, let me jump in on that last point Alan made, because there has been legislation in Springfield that I think some of Alan's colleagues will hold up and trumpet as proof that they've addressed property taxes. They've done some things to increase senior exemptions and homestead exemptions and all that, which in some cases does result in people paying nominally less in property taxes. But you're shifting money from your left pocket to the right pocket, because as Representative Skillicorn said, if you're not actually limiting the amount of money that governments are levying, collecting, and spending, you paying less is going to result in somebody else paying more, because it's a zero-sum game. And so just as is the case when commercial property tax collections go down, meaning that residential collections go up, if your residential property taxes go down, somebody else's are going to go up. It's like, the old adage about like poking a balloon, it's got to give somewhere else. What we need to do is actually curb the ability of local governments to take more money.
Yep. Yeah, to put it directly, more of something I like to talk about with property taxes. The assessor, people like to blame the assessor for the property taxes. They're not at fault for the property taxes. It is the taxing body. And the way I try to explain it is the assessor has the manure spreader. He's trying to spread the manure evenly across all the properties, but he's still, every time the taxing body raises their levy, he's got more manure to spread around. So that's kind of an easy way to think about it for people, that it's the taxing bodies that are the real problem in the increase of property taxes. So we'll turn it over to Rep. Alan Skilcorn. I've known him for several years. He's gone down to Springfield now and is fighting for a free market and good policies, and he can give us an update on what's happening in Springfield in regard to property taxes, but also into education choice and everything happening in Springfield now. So,
Yeah, I'll dive into a few different issues. My district, someone just asked me where my district is, so I represent the 66th district, which represents basically Elgin up to Crystal Lake. So northwest, far northwest of Chicago, still located, very much suburban, Collier counties, Kane County and McHenry County. And actually, it's
The highest property tax
it's
county.
ironic that I represent the Collier counties because, they get the worst deal out of them all. From the property tax perspective, from some of the regulations like prevailing wage, they get a really bad deal. And unfortunately, it's just, the root of the matter is that Chicago power brokers want more of your money. More of their money for their patronage jobs, more of your money for their games, more of your money for a school funding from the rig that benefits Chicago and not the suburban and downstate school districts. It doesn't work for my constituents. It doesn't work for you guys. It doesn't work for the rest of the state. So we have a situation where Cook County and Chicago have a different property tax system. Not just how homes are evaluated, but you pay on a quarter of your home value, not a third like the rest of the state, but also the games that are played. And if you look at downtown Loop area, you see appraisals that are underappraised. So Willis Tower, the Sears Tower, right? That's sold for $1.3 billion, even though its appraisal is like $700 million. So they're paying half the property taxes that you or I would be if we owned that. That's not fair. And that's one of the big reasons why we have to keep bailing out the Chicago schools. Now, the Chicago school, the school district has made quite a few financial mistakes. They've shorted their pensions and things like that. But the bigger picture is we are, unfortunately, the machine in Cook County undervaluates these high-dollar loop properties. And that means that we have to jump in with another $500 million from the rest of the state to help fund the schools there, which obviously need to be funded. And we need to have education system that works for everybody in the state. We need to work for Chicago. It needs to work for small towns. It needs to work for suburbia because we're not going to grow without that, right? But unfortunately, we're so reliant on property taxes, and we've allowed the power brokers to have so many loopholes and games that it hurts the children, it hurts the educators, and ultimately it hurts our communities. And without that, we're not going to be able to grow and get out of this. And most of the people that are watching online or here in the room know that Illinois, is in a situation where we're stagnating. Population's going down. I think you just mentioned a couple situations where we lost the auto manufacturer facility with 4,000 jobs. The big reason was that you're not right to work. And I've had a great debate lately on right to work. And this is not some evil thing. It's not some big buzzword. All it is, it's saying that as a condition of employment, you can't force someone to be part of the union. So the First Amendment allows this free association, right? Which means workers could work together and try to get better conditions and better contracts. But here in Illinois, you don't have free association, of forced association. So if you're in a closed shop, that means that the union come in and say you have to pay dues, you have to be part of the union. Even if you want to negotiate your own contract, you are not allowed to do that. You're not allowed to withhold your union dues, even though the union might fund things that you don't agree with. Unfortunately, and that's really what the case is. It's not an issue of not letting people unionize. It's not an issue of not letting people associate. It's not an issue of negotiation. It's an issue of not letting people negotiate, and that's really the key. Now, the spin on this is that it's reverse of that. It's anti-worker and things, but it's absolutely not. And if the union is providing a good service, if it's providing benefits that the workers want, they're going to join every single time. So who do these laws ultimately benefit? Not the worker, but the union cronies, the big bosses. Unfortunately, they have their big golf courses and their big pensions and their big fees that they get out of this, and it's the workers that get hurt. We all want people to earn more money because people making more money are more productive. They're able to produce more in their local
And they're paying more in taxes.
Well, let's just get rid of taxes. Come on. But they're actually able to do more in their communities and such, and it helps the local economy. So we're all for that. Let's get back to that, though. I mean, this is the cronyism, and there is a former senator, Senator Keats, who left Illinois for Texas, and he called it the corruption tax here in Illinois, and specifically Cook County. And that's really the way it goes. I know we want to talk a little bit about education. It's great being at the Heartland Institute, kind of a cornerstone free market ideas and the free market of ideas. And that's kind of where educational choice comes from, because there are different ways to educate children. I think we all agree. There's not, this isn't a one size fits all. There's different styles, there's different programs, there's different curriculum, there's different procedures. And in a competitive marketplace of ideas, a competitive marketplace of education, it gives parents and families more choice. We all want student-focused, family-driven education. This is really a great way to do that. And your local public school might be the answer. Your parochial school might be the answer. There might be a homeschool network that might be the answer. Let's give people that opportunity. And the neat thing about this one, it's not direct taxpayer funded. I mean, it's individuals giving to charitable organizations.
Hold on. So talk about that. Mention it by name, because now we're segueing into something we haven't mentioned yet.
Okay. So there's an educational tax credit that recently passed in Illinois, and Lenny told me that the handout will be on the table.
Yes, handout's on the back. It's a 2-pager. I went through the legislation itself and put down all the rules and regulations so you can see them there on the back table.
And a bunch of acronyms. Remember those acronyms. There will be a test later.
Yes.
And this,
already had one quiz.
This really just a lot, and it's limited. So the dollar amount is limited, so individuals can give money towards that and receive a tax credit. Now, this isn't a situation where they're making money off of it. It's 75 cents in a dollar that they can claim. So it's not a situation, it's not a dollar for dollar. It's not some rich guy going, well, I'm going to give $1 million to this and get $1 million back. It's definitely not the case, because it's just like any other deduction, like if you had it for charities, your mortgage interest, property tax deduction, but it's only 75 cents a dollar. It's not dollar for dollar like those others.
Tax credit or a tax deduction?
It's a tax credit, so it lowers your AGI.
Is the tuition paid by a family to the?
Yeah, I'll get to some of those. We'll get to some of those a little bit later. Yeah.
Well, I mean, it isn't set up to be like this. Someone wants, tuition at the school is $10,000 or $20,000 a year. I'm going to give this much money, and then I'm going to get it back from my child. It's not like that. We'll let Lenny get into that.
Yeah, we'll get into those. Yep.
And one nice thing about it is that it's not just. I know that the Catholic Church was quite involved in this. It's actually designed so they are not the biggest recipient either. There's safeguards in there, and it's almost like giving it to a committee that helps charities hand out the money. And it can go to private school, parochial school. It actually can go to some public schools. If your public school applies for it, they can apply for it and receive these funds. But opportunity is that under certain situations, it allows students to go to out of district public schools, private schools, and there are people that could use this opportunity. So I know that my wife and I, we haven't discussed the amount, but we're gonna give this, and we're not the millionaire or something, but we believe in choice, who believe in the freedom of ideas. And this isn't going to be our biggest deduction per se, but it's something that's going to help contribute to the greater pie. And I'm a firm believer that the competition just makes the breed better. I mean, just like everything else. I mean, if you look at any consumer product, what consumer product doesn't benefit from competition? It makes the product better, easier, safer, less expensive. So I think this is a win-win for our state. Now, this was passed as part of a greater funding thing, which was more of a bailout for Chicago pensions. So to be honest, I didn't support it, but I support this key part of it very much so. If this was a separate bill, I would have been very excited to sponsor it and run with it.
Okay, let's get into these the questions about each of the funding methods. There's a lot of different talk about with school choice on how all of it's funded and stuff like that. Literally, when you start thinking about it, though, when you start realizing what the different ways of funding, school choice is actually a subset of true educational choice and education freedom. Because school choice means you're just going to another school, where eventually education freedom is being able to homeschool, being able to take a class in a public school, being able to homeschool for a class, being able to take a class at a private school, being able to take a class online where you can mix and match what you really need to fit that child. So let's talk about some of the different funding methods. One most people have heard of are vouchers. Vouchers is where the state basically pays the tuition for you to go to another school. That's basically how most charters are funded. The local district sends money to the school, to the charter school, for that student. Sometimes that's not called vouchers. Illinois is not actually called vouchers. It's just because the charter school is another public school. So the funds are going to the district, and the district then pays the charter school. So that's kind of the simplest way that most people know about it. Another funding method is education savings accounts. Typically, this is where the state puts money into a savings account for that particular child. The parents then get a debit card that can then pay for any education opportunity they want. This is being used in multiple states. There are 6 states that have ESAs now. They're called ESAs. North Carolina was the last one to pass it. Theirs don't actually get implemented till next year. Nevada actually passed a near universal ESA program. That one is still actually waiting to be funded, so it hasn't started. The biggest one and longest running ESA program is in Arizona right now. That is now gone to every child that goes to public school is now eligible for their own education savings account. It's capped at, I believe, at 32,000 students, and that cap is going to get lifted in a couple of years as the interest grows and more how that's doing. So the last one is tax credit scholarship. This is what Illinois just passed. They're eligible. The people can donate up to $100 million to a scholarship granting organization. Then each one of them can take, it's up to 75% of that in credit. They cannot take the credit on both state and federal income taxes, though. So that's an issue that I think actually is going to end up being resolved in the courts. But that's a different thing. I actually honestly believe there's probably going to be a lawsuit against the tax credit scholarship program at some point coming up too, even though it's going to be ruled constitutional in Illinois. Illinois has what's called a Blaine Amendment, which means no money, no state aid can go to a religious school. But a tax credit scholarship is not taxpayer money. The money is never going into the taxpayer coffers. It's just being given, and the state is basically approving the donations for the tax credit, and it is split up regionally. You can see some of the requirements on it. What the scholarship organizations are actually going to do is they're going to receive these credits after it's been approved by the state. Then they're going to set up a program where they will give scholarships to students. So the scholarship granting authority will be giving the money to each of the schools where the student's going. I know there's still some rules and regulations that have to be set up on that. I believe they're going to be set up where you can get multiple scholarships. and things, but that's still in the works right now. Alan might know a little bit more about how that's going to work or how those rules are going to be set up, but there's nothing limiting that. Other states do the same thing. Florida actually has the biggest tax credit scholarship and the longest running. This year, they actually topped 100,000 students receiving tax credit scholarships. So theirs has an auto escalator in it, which means if they receive 90% of the donations each year that are allowed, the next year that limit goes up by 25%. So they're up actually now over $500 million now in their tax credit program. That's something the Illinois one did not have. They originally had in, it got taken out. So it's stuck at that limit of the $75 million for tax credit for the next 5 years. And this is where Alan gets a shot here. In 5 years, the program automatically ends unless there's a new bill extending it. So that's something they have to work on over the next 5 years to try to extend it. I think it hopefully will get extended, just because once you get so many students in the program, it's hard to stop a government program. But this is a really good program, because what you're doing is these donors are donating money directly to education of a child without it going through the state. So the state can't take their piece off the top and everything. It's going, I believe 95% has to go to the scholarships. There will be some up to 5% administration for the scholarship management organization to be able to just administer everything and all the accounting, all the rules that they have to follow through that. Something else I'd like to touch on too is what a lot of people don't understand. Everybody talks about public education now. Public education has now become synonymous with public schools. When education started, public education started, private schools received government money. Guilds helped private schools and public schools. So public education meant educating the public, not public schools. It wasn't until it was Senator James Carter in Massachusetts, working with Horace Mann, started to force kids back into their what they called common schools, which became the public schools, and it's kind of changed the definition of, and everybody gets confused about that now. Public education does not have to mean a public school, because it really is. You want an educated populace, and that's the point. I don't have the exact quote by Horace Mann, but to paraphrase a little bit, he basically, when he was the first Secretary of Education for Massachusetts, his quote was, paraphrased here, was basically, any parent that gives their child to the public school is giving us a hostage to the system that they can then indoctrinate. So that's what they believe. Your children going into public schools were hostages to their cause. And that's kind of how things have changed over time, what we've done. You'll hear a lot about school choice now. When you're listening to people, they will go, well, school choice is going to reintroduce segregation. That's a myth. It actually increases integration. When parents have the chance to choose the school, it actually increases integration more than segregation. Actually, if you go back, there's a book out, Democracy in Chains, that has come to find out they actually wrote their whole book based on a lie because one of the references was incorrect. When they went back to research those references, and the way the story was done, it was 1959. They basically were talking about vouchers in the state of Virginia. It was in the state of Virginia when they were going through all the segregation. But back then, it was actually the white supremacists who didn't want integration were arguing and trying to kill vouchers because they knew it would cause integration. And the book does get the exact opposite view of that. In fact, when you go into this, school choice, education choice actually increases, well, besides increasing integration, it actually helps the underprivileged and the urban schools the most, because they're the ones typically with the worst schools. In New York City, a study found that educational choice there actually increased the amount of college African-American boys going to college by 24%. So it was able to increase their education outcomes to get more into school. It actually increased their college persistence because they were better prepared for school. If you look at all the studies, I think there's been 100 studies now on school choice. Of those, one actually showed, I'm sorry, that's changed now because there was 2 more. There have been 3 studies that have showed negative impact on the kids that went into school choice. 2 of those studies were on the same data set out of Louisiana in the last couple of years. But they did the study after 2 years in the program. This year, after the third year, now they are back almost even with the kids that didn't go with school choice, that stayed in the school they were in. And what they're finding is the cumulative effect of any kid that goes into school choice. If you look at all the data, yes, there is a decrease the first year, sometimes into the second year, but depending on the school. But by the third year and then by the fourth year, the kids are above where they were before. So it's that changing schools, the different environments, the different standards, the different way they're doing it does cause that at the beginning, but over time it actually increases it. Studies out of Florida even show that kids just going to charter school alone, their lifetime earnings, I believe, is like 6 figures higher just because they were able to go through a charter school and were able to get into a better college. So school choice works. If you look at the scientific studies, the same thing, same basis holds. Everyone pretty much except for that one in Louisiana showed a positive impact. The other thing you'll hear a lot of is that education choice takes money away from your local public schools. In some cases, it does take money away from local schools. The majority of times, though, what happens is the charter schools or the education choice program only gives 75, 80%, some give 90% of the money that was going to the public school to the child. The school is left with that other 10 to 25%. So the per student funding has actually increased for every student that stayed at the school they were at, where the choice kids actually went with for less money. So it's actually saving the state money, but also increasing the funding per child for the students that went into public school. One of the things you can all, it's like, well, the public school, they have the same mentality as a government body. That's my money. If you're not giving me the money, then you're taking money away from me, even though you're still educating the child for less and better in almost every single case. So there's a lot more to everything that goes on with there. One of the other things that really has just kind of started being touched on in the school choice movement is not all about, school choice is not all about the academics. There is a lot of bullying going on within the public schools and in some private schools and stuff, but it's less in the private schools because parents can move their child to another school. So you see this, though, it's shooting down in Mattoon. It looks like that was a case of bullying where the school did nothing about it, and the kid actually came back and tried to shoot the guy that was bullying him. Case in New York is the same thing with the stabbing up there. So, and there are stories now coming out more and more of how kids that have been bullied use tax credit scholarships in Georgia, use other programs where they can escape the bullying, go to a school of their choice, and be free from that because some of the schools are not taking care of it. There's this, Washington, D.C., literally there, the school choice program there has literally saved children's lives. There are parents that actually say, I always worried about what my kid was doing in school, whether they were going to come home alive every day. Now that they're in a private school, they're like, I don't have to worry about that anymore. I know they're in a safe environment. And some parents don't even care if the school's a better school. They just know their child is safe. And so that's some of the things you need to think about when you're talking about school choice and education choice and real education freedom. A quick thing here, charter schools are probably the most regulated way of school choice. Vouchers is second. It's so easy for state legislators to put restrictions on vouchers and stuff, because they want to pretend they're doing something and actually helping students when they're really not. ESAs are probably one of the least regulated. There are some regulations with ESAs, and tax credit scholarships are the least regulated of all because the money never goes into the state coffers, so it makes it even harder for them to regulate. Illinois is actually going to make any school that takes a scholarship from a scholarship management organization will have to do some state testing. So that is still there. I know we're not going to get into state testing a whole lot here, but real quick, my take is on standardized testing is a joke. It's a tool for the bureaucrats. It has nothing to do with the education of the child. So, so I'll let, if you want to jump in a little bit on school choice or anything I've said, please do so real quick, and then I've got some more questions already up here. For the rest of you, if you have questions, please write them down, lift it up. Chris will come around and pick them up and bring them up here.
I'm very curious to hear Alan's take on just really maybe some of the your insights into how this $500 million in tax credits came about, what the environment is like in Springfield on school choice and education freedom generally, and the future of it.
Well, I believe it's only 75 million, not a half.
Well,
So
that's $100 million a
100
year for
million,
5
okay,
years.
okay.
So
5
I'm
years, 75 for
total.
the actual credit.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
but $500 million
For the-
in
over the
donations.
5 years.
Yes,
Okay, yeah,
$500
5
million in donations will be made through this program.
So I'm going to actually back it up a little bit. Let's talk about a macro view of what this really is like, and think of United States and the opportunity that we have here. People think of our country as prosperous, but why are we prosperous? Because you have the freedom to try different things. Now, the average, small businessman or a successful family or person probably tries a bunch of things and fails. And each one of those, are those the outliers or is success the outlier? I would argue that the failures are outliers, even though to get to that prosperity, we have to try things and we have to find the niche that works. We have to find the thing that works for us. So the same thing kind of works for education. So if you have someone that's a critic of choice, they're going to bring up, well, I once heard about a charter school that didn't work, right? Is that the outlier or is that the norm? Is that the opportunity to try something different to get to that better place? I mean, I would argue that that's why we can have a better school system. And I would argue that's how we get to that prosperity in education, is we try new and different things. You have new teachers that are coming into the field, every year with new ideas and different new techniques. And some of these things maybe don't work that great, but some of them are great and they reach kids in a new way, and the whole system adopts that. I mean, it does kind of change and kind of get better as we go and we learn. And that's the same thing about the schools themselves. So, from a macro view, the competition, trying different things, is the way to make education as a whole better. And let's learn from it. It shouldn't be about power. It shouldn't be about bureaucrats wanting their way. I mean, the resistance to some of these school choice ideas are because bureaucrats want more power over the money and over the kids. And that doesn't empower the children. It does not give a better opportunity for the families. So that's the bigger perspective. The more specific to Springfield is there's a lot of pushback on this from those power brokers, from those bureaucrats. I actually remember saying, I was actually a little disappointed in our governor in that situation because he was very much against the bailout of Chicago. So I went and argued on the floor that this is a bailout of pensions, and this isn't about education, this is about bureaucrats and power. And sure enough, the next day he finds a compromise which had all the same bailouts in it, yet added this tax credit. And how am I supposed to go back on the floor, take back all that, because it was all true, for this? And I know I was very frustrated in that situation, and then lo and behold, I always take the stairs up to the chamber. I started the stair caucus because I try to get a little bit more exercise, so I don't take the elevator. So there is I think I was in a hurry to get to the chamber that it was a late July. And so there's one stairway that's a little bit more direct, a little faster. And you know who was waiting at the top of that stairway? One of the lobbyists for the teachers' unions. And he said, I heard it, you're voting against this. And I asked him, well, who told you? Because I only told a couple people. And I thought that was quite ironic. And so they were very much against this bill, even though there was another $350 million for school funding for the state of Illinois per year in this particular bill. But because of this tax credit provision, they were very much against it. And I found that to be very interesting, the topic. And the idea of extending it, I think we're all going to have to be very active, 3-4 years from now, making sure that the families that take advantage of this are vocal and saying that this works for their families. So once you create a constituency, it's hard to take back this type of credit. But there are going to be political powers that don't want to renew this. So we need to make sure, there's going to be a lot of families that benefit from this. We need to make sure those families are heard and that the representatives hear these families. And, from an ideological standpoint, this is not something that's controversial. But from a power standpoint, these guys don't want to give up power. So that's what we're going to have to go for. And I think we're going to be able to do that just because naturally, once you extend something to people and they receive it and it's well liked, it's hard to take it away. And this is a good thing, and it really isn't a situation where the state's meddling with it. This is individuals that want to fund organizations, and it seems to be set up a pretty. I actually love the idea of Florida. Gosh, that would be great if we get to that 90% level and it goes up every year. That would be great, and it doesn't take away from other schools. This is not this, and some things are a zero-sum game. This is not. And I think that's the key when we're talking to our friends and neighbors that might think this is controversial. This is definitely not a zero-sum game, and the benefit far outweighs anything else. Is that the benefit is that we have families and children that are getting a better opportunity, and we need more productive members of society, not less.
Well, I think it's very important to point out one thing here that I think's gone unsaid. The actual the children who will be recipients of this scholarship, priority is given to children that come from families that earn less than 185% of the federal poverty level, and so the children that will most directly benefit from this are the kids that are coming from the least wealthy households in the state. These are the kids that need help the most. And as has been mentioned, these are all pre-tax dollars. And so these scholarship granting organizations, these SGOs, are going to be able to help these children that are coming from very impoverished households attend a school that they wouldn't otherwise have the opportunity to attend. And whether it's a Catholic school or a parochial school or a private school, or a charter school, these are great schools by and large. And as Alan said, oftentimes the critics of school choice paint with a very broad brush, but ultimately this is just about giving these families, giving these children an opportunity that they wouldn't otherwise have.
So we got about 5 minutes left, so there's a couple of questions I can answer real quick, and then if we can answer the other, we'll see get as many questions as we can. Will the tax credit scholarship basically be across the whole population or go to one student? No, you cannot direct it to a single student. Every SGO will have a process that they will have to follow, and that's part of their fiduciary responsibility every year. They will have to give the statistics and everything too, so they can make sure that there's no conflict of interest in the scholarships and stuff as they go through. Hillsdale College and their charter schools, yes, their Barney charter schools. Is the state of Illinois open to it? They are, hopefully, because there is a Barney charter school that has applied for authorization in the south side of Chicago. The Chicago Classical Academy, if you want to look them up on the internet, their application is in at CPS now. So we'll see how it goes. I did hear there was another one potentially out in Libertyville that may be starting as well in Illinois. So I think they're further behind in the process. But yes, that is happening and potentially coming to Illinois. As far as the higher education stuff go, we'll have to do another higher education event here. But if whoever asked that question, talk to me afterwards. We can talk more about that. Homeschooling and government regulation. Yes, there are a lot of homeschoolers that don't want any government regulations. None of the programs set up so far in any of the states on school choice affect homeschoolers unless they decide they want to take some of the state money. Nevada and Arizona do not include homeschoolers. Every student had to be a public school student coming in. Nevada they had to be there 100 days. So it is up to the homeschooler themselves whether they want to be a part of the program or not in any of the states that have done that so far. Well, one of you take this question real quick. What is home rule?
Alan, did you plant that? Did you put that
I
question
did
in
not
before
plant
you
it.
walked
That
over
was
there?
here before he got here.
The home rule does two things. I'll talk about the good and the bad. First, the good is that it allows individual municipalities to set some of their own rules free of state regulation. The second, and this is the more problematic, it allows municipalities to raise unlimited amount of taxes, so they can raise their property taxes with no property tax caps or anything like that, and also to go in debt, and practically an unlimited debt.
And create new taxes that they
And-
wouldn't otherwise be
And
able
create
to.
new taxes, specifically like sales taxes and stuff. But the big thing is that the Collier County is all covered by the property tax cap law. So all these municipalities that are not home rule are not allowed to raise property taxes that much, just CPI and new growth. But like say, a village that is either more than 25,000 people or has a referendum to create home rule, they can raise their property taxes to their heart's content. And the same thing with debt.
Yep. This question here, I'll answer, but I figure you two guys might want to weigh in on this one too. There's been a lot of talk of school district consolidation. Will that actually make a difference in Illinois? And I'll go real quick first on my opinion. In the short term, yes, it will probably save money. In the long term, it will do absolutely no good, because you still have just a bigger bureaucracy than has the easier for corruption and stuff. The way to fix the system is going to be education savings accounts or tax credit scholarships funding ESAs for every student, so every child gets an account for themselves to go to whatever school they want, regardless of it's public or private school. That's the only way you're ever going to fix education. Consolidation won't fix the education problem in the long run.
Well, I'll give the counterpoint. I do think that we certainly need to consolidate some of our school districts. In central and southern Illinois, it's not uncommon to have a one-building school district. So now you have both the superintendent and a principal, for instance, overseeing a one-building school district.
They have those in Lake County.
Well, you have a very unique small one in Lake County. But so much of it is just common sense, economies of scale. We have something like 850, I think, school districts in Illinois. The last time there was any concerted effort to consolidate school districts was, I believe, in the early 80s. And so it certainly needs to happen because there's a lot of redundancies when you have 850 school districts in both administration and in services and things like that. But it's an area where we can certainly do some good. But still, one of the main drivers, though, like anything else, I mean, it's how much something costs and how are we paying for it. So how much are we taking in and how much are we paying out? And in that regard, we need to look at ways to provide public education more efficiently and use tax dollars more effectively. And so often schools need to be given more tools to be able to reduce their costs. And by the way, we're talking about the cost of education. Pensions are a whole different issue because pensions aren't paid. By and large, pension costs are not paid by local school districts. Pension costs come out of the general revenue fund that the legislature allocates every year. But I think school consolidation is an important component of it, giving schools tools to reduce their costs is another component, and then school choice is another component.
So I'll jump in. Did you know that the state of Florida has 90 school districts and the state of Illinois has nearly 900? But it is a little bit more to it than that. So I represent two of the biggest consolidated districts in the state of Illinois. And I can tell you from looking over their books and looking over their expenses, sometimes the economy of scale gets bound up with bureaucracy. And if you look at the size of government and how efficient they're run, there's a bell curve. So a really small government is not very efficient to run. But as it gets a little bit bigger, there's this efficiency. There's this, there's an economy of scale because, they're not buying separate snowplow trucks and they're not paving separate parking lots. They don't have wasteful, duplicated buildings. They don't have additional bureaucrats like superintendents.
And deputy assistant superintendents.
And if you notice, everybody that works for the school district now that's not a teacher is an assistant superintendent nowadays. I don't know if you've noticed that, but the accountants, assistant superintendent of finance, the building manager, assistant superintendent of building management. It's just interesting to use the titles. But then as the size of government grows, the efficiency is lost. So there's a peak level, size of efficiency. That's what we want to shoot for. But also consolidation means more than that. It's where the district lines are. And that really matters because there's different areas of excuse me, of property wealth and, commercial versus residential. So you have, especially southern Cook County, you have these large swaths of lots of homes, lots of families, lots of children, and then vacant commercial properties. So you have all of a sudden crazy high property taxes. Let's compare Speaker Mike Madigan's property taxes. He pays about $5,000 a year on his home that's valued at almost $300,000. It's probably underassessed though, but let's not get there. If the same property value in Harvey, Illinois, would have an $18,000 property tax bill, majority of that going to schools, because that there's so much vacant commercial space there, and you have a high amount of students in those districts. Now, if you consolidate it and able to remap some of those lines and make that a little bit more fair, the people, who could afford to live in Harvey, Illinois? Who could afford to start a business in Harvey, Illinois? You just can't. And that's one reason why there's such despair and lack of opportunity in those areas. So if we looked at it as a greater picture, that's something we could solve through consolidation and redrawing the maps. Fortunately, that's a political process because the neighboring district that has all the good commercial properties and not that many students doesn't want to give that up because, they've got the buku amount of money coming in. But that's not the way it should work. And, we all know that we have to have a system that's fair and the scales of justice are equally weighted.
Let's thank Andrew and Alan for coming. We're out of time, but if you have questions, please come up. I'm sure we'll have more opinion, especially the one about how we can get out of this mess without Madigan.
Let me just say in closing, at the beginning I mentioned that it's awful lonely being a free marketeer in Illinois. It's especially lonely being a free marketeer in the State House, and so I find myself in our fair capital city quite often when the legislature is in advocating for taxpayers, and there are taxpayers have don't have very many friends in the State House. Oftentimes people are looking for ways to increase taxes and grow the size of government. But one of the greatest champions of Illinois taxpayers in our legislature is Representative Skillicord. And so I'm especially thankful that he was able to join us today because he really is a very good friend of Illinois taxpayers. And he's one of the guys that's working harder than most on your behalf in Springfield. So while he may not represent you in Springfield, he is certainly advocating on your behalf, and a wonderful man to know, and very thankful that he was able to join us today.
Yeah, thank you all for coming. Over here on the table, there's actually an education choice poster. If you know any school board members or other people that are interested, pick one up, hand them out. If you need more, please let us know. If you need a speaker, please let Andrew or I know. We can work on that, getting you speakers for different topics. If you want to go into more about school choice, I'm sure we can talk more about that. Higher ed, we need to do an event for that here sometime again soon. And just thank you all for coming out on a Saturday morning to Heartland Institute. Thank you.